Welcome to today's podcast by Profectus Livestock Solution. My name is Jody. Along with me, I have Dr. Brian Dorcey. If you could give yourself a little brief intro about yourself and what Profectus is and what we have to offer.
Yeah. My name is Brian Dorcey. Grew up on an integrated cow-calf and swine operation in northeast Nebraska. Went to South Dakota State University for undergrad, and then on to Iowa State for vet school. Came here to Worthington, Minnesota, right out of school, into a mixed animal practice situation where we historically had dealt with swine, dairy, beef, and a little bit of small animal here in town. Been here for 20 years, and as we have migrated to Profectus Livestock Solutions, our company as it is today, built on a long history of aggressive and progressive veterinary medicine. We are today an integrated nutrition and animal health company, focusing on all the production species, swine, dairy, beef. We do business across the upper Midwest, and as it says in our name, we are a solution company. So whether you're talking to one of our veterinarians or one of our nutritionists or one of our sales associates, they really dig in to get to know the issues on the farm or opportunities on the farm that are maybe not being captured today, and find a way to bring more profitability to the farm. And so our business model is digging in and getting to know the farm with more profitability in mind.
So today's topic is the feedlot, the total revenue.
Absolutely. We get this question a lot of how do feed yards make their money, and where are low-hanging fruit or easy opportunities to come in and maximize some profit potential and or streamline some processes. And so as I go out, our customers range from calf ranches to farmer feeders to commercial feeders, as well as some cow-calf operations. So all aspects of the beef industry have different profit potentials and different revenue streams. And I would say the main ones that we deal with, whether it be from sales, nutrition, or veterinary medicine and productivity, on a feed yard, the first one would be the cattle margin. So it'd be the buy and the sell, the difference in profit in how we buy and how we produce that animal. So sometimes our profitability at the end of the harvest period of a calf's life begins when you buy it. And so talking to farmers about value and about type of cattle that we buy is something that all of our staff is really comfortable doing. And starting with the end in mind is kind of where we start that approach. So as we talk about profit streams for a feedlot, typically the buy and the sell of the cattle and is one revenue stream. So the profit on the sale of the cattle. And generally we give advice, whether it be sales, nutrition, or veterinary advice. We start with the end in mind. So making sure we get more pounds of beef out the end of the production system is where our whole team starts for a farm. And so whether that's advising people on the type of calf to buy, the type of vaccine protocol to feed or to administer, or the type of feed to feed, that's where we come in and start with that revenue stream in mind of what are the goals of the farm. And that's probably even further back than step one, is getting to know the farm and what are the goals of the farm. And that's where I think we do a great job of making sure that we address the goals of the farm and then fit that into a list of things that we can do to influence productivity on the farm to achieve the goals. So the profit on the cattle is one revenue stream. Manure value, especially on our farmer feeders, is that they use the manure value of the cattle to offset fertilizer cost in their cropping operations. So knowing whether we're dealing with a feeder farmer or a farmer feeder is super valuable for us as we come on to consult a farm, because whether the cropping operation or the cattle operation or the primary focuses help us direct resources to maximize return on investment. Yardage would be another revenue stream that most of our feeders talk about. How we pay for infrastructure around the farm, whether that's labor, facilities, tractors and those kind of things. So how we can influence yardage and maximize that and make sure that we're being fair to the cattle operation as well as being fair to the cropping operation. There's kind of four main revenue streams that I see when I come onto a feed yard. One would be the cropping operation. So how do we get revenue from our crop? How do we charge the cattle operation for crop revenue? Manure value from that crop. I see a lot of our farmer feeders lean into that and use that to offset their whole farm income as they maximize manure value. Three, obviously the profit on the cattle. We want to make money on the cattle that we lay in, but they've got a lot of costs to bear while they're there. And then yardage. How do we properly assess yardage for the cattle operation? So yardage considerations are going to be different in a confinement barn situation versus an open yard in Kansas situation. So all those things come into play when we make a recommendation on a farm of what resource or what revenue stream we can allocate resources to maximize that revenue stream.
Okay. What's the difference between commercial feed yards and farmer feeders, and what's the difference between their revenue streams?
Yeah, I think there is a difference in thought process around revenue streams when you're a commercial feeder versus a farmer feeder. So I think let's start with the farmer feeder first. I think because manure plays a part, because corn basis plays a part, and we've generally got an integrated cropping operation as part of that family farm, they have the ability to capture some of the value of that manure back onto their own ground and offset fertilizer cost versus some of the commercial feeders that I work with. Either sell it for less than its probably maximum value, or in some cases it's a cost to dispose for those farms. And so it becomes a profit center for a farmer feeder versus a commercial feed yard. So when we talk about manure, that is a farm by farm consideration that we discuss. Corn cropping operation, corn basis management, I think is different between the farmer feeder and the commercial yards. Typically, the farmer feeder gets to decide what his corn cost is into his operation, or his feedstuffs are into his operation, because the cropping operation is producing those for the feeding operation. The commercial feeder generally is either a customer, so they're buying it on a margin basis, or they produce a small percentage of their needs to offset that. And so I don't think that the commercial feeders get to take advantage of what some of the farmer feeders can do when it comes to an integrated cropping operation. Profit on the cattle, I would say the farmer feeder, again, he's paying himself for his corn, or herself. They're paying themselves for the corn, paying themselves for the yardage. The profit on the cattle is very important, but probably not as the profit on the cattle. They need to stay full, probably not as much as a commercial feeder, because lots of times the customer inside those yards is the one managing that profit potential on the cattle. So I think they're two different systems, where the commercial feeder is concerned about keeping his hotel full. So is the farmer feeder, but he's also paying himself for his yardage. The last one would be overall keeping your system running. The commercial feeder needs to be full of cattle to keep his system running, and so does the farmer feeder. But I've got a number of farmer feeders that, when prices are high, or they have the opportunity, they may have the infrastructure bought, but they don't have to pay an employee every day, so they're able to sit out some of the more volatile times, or times when it doesn't make sense in the beef business to be at maximum capacity.
What is the biggest income opportunities for feed yards?
I think it varies by yard. Like I say, some of the business mechanics of feed yards is to market their corn through their cattle. And so if that's one of the biggest ones, then obviously the more yield, the higher productivity of the cropping operation is what we want to do, what we want to focus on, and their ability to market that corn through their cattle in basis savings. But they also want to turn that corn or crop, whatever it is, into maximum pounds of beef. And so I think that's what Profectus does really well, is we help our farmers do one of two things: either maximize the pounds of beef for their cropping acres that they have, or we maximize our pounds of beef through the improved feed efficiency that Profectus brings to the table. And some of that cropping acres can be sold as dry corn, or can be sold as a commodity that is that's over and above what we can get for productivity for our feed yard spaces. So we did an analysis for a 10,000 head yard. One of the nutritionists and myself, as well as Dan Grieve, our CFO, that just by adopting the Profectus Livestock Solutions method of feeding this 10,000 head yard, because their capacity is locked, they would have the ability, because of the reduced amount of feedstuffs that they would market through those cattle, to sell 1,000 acres more dry corn or of that commodity out, in addition to producing the same amount of beef out of their feedlot operation. So it's kind of whole farm integrated management when we look at crop versus feedlot capacity. So how can we apply the efficiencies that we can pick up by formulating Profectus feed, and how do we apply that over the whole farm, whether it be in beef, more pounds of beef, or whether it would be in more pounds of saleable commodities for the whole farm.
Why is change so hard for feedlots?
I think, we get into, there's a lot of tradition in the beef business, and so I think some of our historical success has been built on really solid, sound scientific advancement, genetic advancement, technological advancement. And in the last 5 to 15 years, it's been fun to watch the technology creep into the cattle feeding business, as well as just the beef business in general. So whether it be the onset of iPad-based feeding applications like Performance Livestock, Cattler, and their adoption into the beef feeding business, or technologies like Experior or some of these other beta agonists, as well as implants and newer antibiotic technologies. They've all earned their place, but they were very often slow to adopt. And some of that has to go back to building on success. Lots of the farms that we work with today are where they are today because of a strong family foundation and strong traditions that they know have developed a system that works for their farm. And I think that's what we do really well at Profectus Livestock, is understand the farm, where they've come from and what works for them, and bring opportunities to that farm to take it to the next level. And so as we look at our feeding approach onto a farm, the extra savings that we pick up from our feed efficiency by formulating to amino acids, that's going to be the next one, the next technology that comes in. Because if I've got a $50 to $100 head advantage on my farm because of how I feed my cattle, that gets it to the next generation. And as that becomes more profitable, you've got, in this competitive environment, got an effective way to reduce your cost of gain to compete for those cattle, especially today in a short supply. And so they earn their place because of proven track record, and that's where we're continuing at Profectus to generate data to prove our process out in different classes of cattle. Because historically, the feedlot environment has been built on net energy system when they formulate rations, and as we move into a more amino acid approach, the body of data continues to get bigger for our farmers to look at that and say, hey, that's maybe something that we can take a look at in our farms.
Why is it important to connect feed strategy to the broader income economics?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. If you look at the cost of production of a feedlot animal or any animal, the majority of the cost of producing that animal all the way to the end lays on the feed space. And so that's the bulk of the cost of that animal is in the feed. And so It's funny because as a veterinarian, I get challenged or asked about opportunities to save money on animal health. And as we look at the pie chart of what it takes to produce an animal, the little bitty sliver of animal health is what I find a lot of people focus on. And where we should be focusing on is anything we can do to reduce the overall cost of production, which essentially lies in greater feed efficiency or getting more pounds of beef for feed. So that's where I get excited. Is we've historically been Prairie Livestock Supply back in the day. Now we're Profectus Livestock Solutions, and we have a feed and animal health opportunity. Is we have the ability to help farmers be more efficient and save money on the animal health piece of it. But some of the major savings that we bring to the table when we work with farmers is on the feed side of the business, of picking up efficiency, growing more pounds of beef on less feed, and then giving some flexibility back to the farm for all of the income or all of the products that it produces, whether it's crop or beef.
So how does nutrition tie into the four bases that we've talked about so far?
Yeah, I think nutrition goes into a lot of the key places of the income streams in the feed yard. I think, we take yardage, and as we formulate diets, it's been interesting as we've been able to balance for amino acids. We've been able to produce the same amount of beef with less feedstuffs. So that means less work for your mixer, less trips for your mixer, greater employee efficiency is one. So the Profectus Livestock Solutions nutrition program has had a direct impact on yardage. So I think becoming more efficient and getting more work done for the yardage we're doing is operationally efficient for most of our farms. I think the profit on the cattle as an income stream, the Profectus nutrition approach has impacted that, obviously, by more pounds of beef out the door at the end of the day with less resources. So whether that's live weight or hot carcass weight, we've got data that has demonstrated our ability to produce more beef per acre than the net energy system, which is what we've traditionally used in the feedlot industry. Manure, again, because of the days on feed that we pick up and our ability to reduce the cost of gain, allows us to shorten that feeding period and manage the manure. We don't make better manure than what anybody else does, but our ability to get more turns out of a yard because we shorten our yardage or our feeding period helps us manage manure. And then I would say our corn profitability, we're able to have flexibility to raise more beef on the corn that we raise on our farm. So let's say we've got a finite number of acres we can farm. We don't need to devote that all to cattle production at this point. We can have maximum cattle production or to the same level of cattle production, but also have some corn acres left to sell and bring overall farm profitability to a higher level.
So one more question before we wrap up. The producers, what steps can they take to make sure they know their numbers?
Yeah, I think knowing our numbers is the basis for being able to assign into all these income streams that we've talked about today, of where the opportunity exists on a farm. So I think as we consult with farms, we see broad ranges of what operations charge for yardage. And so knowing your numbers of what we need, or as a farm, knowing the numbers that we need to charge for yardage to cover our costs, super important. And I think that's important to the banker. I think it's important to our families. I think it's important for the legacy of the farm, is getting to know our numbers. So as you look at knowing your numbers in that yardage category, super important, so we can plan to replace a mixer or a tractor or those kind of things. So knowing what our true costs on yardage is important. I think when we talk about manure value, that income stream, knowing what the manure value is to our cropping operation. So having analysis there and planning appropriately and how we offset the cost of commercial fertilizer with our manure, and knowing what that we're comparing commercial fertilizer to our manure apples to apples, I think is super important. So I think you got to know your numbers for that and productivity. Corn value was the other income stream that we talked about today. So I think knowing your numbers of what your farm's ability to produce as far as corn is and what your land will actually do, I think is super important. Knowing what our costs are to get that commodity into our cattle feeding operation is super important. We've got to know our numbers for that. And then the third one is profit or loss on the the fourth one was profit or loss on the cattle. That income stream I think is super important, especially in today's environment where cattle are very expensive. And we've got to know what our numbers are so we can, when we go to the sale barn or go to buy cattle, we know what we can afford to pay. And so I think that's where working with Profectus Livestock Solution, we can lean into any of those four areas and find ways or suggestions or recommendations to improve, either help you know your costs or get to a place where we've identified our costs and find opportunities to improve those. That way, when we go buy cattle, we know that we can pay $50 more than our neighbor can because we've got a handle on our cost. We know where our revenue streams are, and how do we push the buttons or throw the levers that either reduce those or make us more efficient as a farm. And I think that's what we do, whether it's our nutritionists, our veterinarians, or our sales associates, is help the farms identify opportunities to improve in any or all of those four areas.
Thank you for joining us today, and hope you enjoyed our podcast, and hopefully you can like and share our video today, and so we can bring you